Welcome to Judaism's Gift to the World, a brand new course from a very ancient Torah. A warm and special welcome to each and every one of you. Looking forward to a terrific journey together as we deepen our study of Torah. I want to start with a quick story. You know, it's an old story, but it's a good one, of the church on a Sunday morning where the churchgoers are coming out of the church and they see two beggars sitting on the step outside of the church. One of them has a big cross around his neck, and the other one has a big mug of Dovid, the yarmulke, and some payas, tzitzis. So all the churchgoers, they come out of church, see a Christian beggar, a Jewish beggar, and they give to the Christian beggar, and they look sort of strangely at the Jewish beggar, thinking to themselves, this guy's not very good, is he? So anyways, after a while, the Christian beggar is raking it in. The Jewish beggar is being practically ignored. At the end after everyone left, the priest comes out and he notices what's going on. He comes over to the Jewish beggar and he says, "Listen, sir, they say you guys are supposed to be smart, but I've never seen something so stupid. Why would you sit a Jewish beggar outside of a Christian church on a Sunday morning? I mean, especially next to this guy." So the Jewish beggar turns to the guy next to him and says, "Hey Moshe, look who's telling the Goldstein brothers how to do business." It's one of my favorite stories. As Jewish people, we've introduced a lot to this world. We've introduced, some will argue, the whole idea of marketing is a Jewish invention. Facebook is certainly a Jewish invention. Not Jewish, but it's from the Jews, from Mark Zuckerberg, right? Facebook, Google, I believe both Sergey and Larry are Jewish, if I'm not mistaken, right?
You're quite right.
We've introduced relativity and the polio vaccine, even pacemakers. So many things we've introduced to the world. But that's what Jews have introduced to the world. What about Judaism? Facebook and Google, polio and pacemakers aren't exactly Jewish. They were just introduced by Jewish people. But what contributions did Judaism, specifically Judaism, introduce to the world? And with that, I'd like to just start off with a nice, casual, easy introduction. On page 2, if you don't mind, just jotting down some thoughts on exercise 1.1. What values do you cherish? If you had the ability to create a perfect society, what would be the values and attitudes about life that you would instill in this society? Just think about that for a few moments, not too long. I don't want to spend too much time on this. As they say in Israel, katzar v'la'inyan, short and to the point. If you were God, and you wanted to introduce a perfect world, what would be the values that you would want to bring to the society?
Do unto others.
Okay, nice. Do unto others what you don't want done to yourself. Okay? The golden rule.
Golden rule.
Very nice. Anybody else? Thoughts to share? Yes, Stacy. Tolerance, which means being able to accept others that are different to yourself. Anti-Semitism, minorities, right? Good. Anybody else? Kindness. Mutual respect. You're the same as Jim. Mutual respect and do unto others. Anybody else? Righteousness. Good. What kind of values? Honesty. Good. Honesty is nice. Nice. What else? Anybody else? Integrity. Right? Many don't realize. Many of us think that Judaism's contributions to the world were merely religious. Very significant religious contributions. Take a look at this religious contribution. Do you know that 55% of humankind subscribe to some form of Abrahamic religion? 55%, according to the 2015 census. So we received the Torah on Mount Sinai 3,300 years ago. The Christians, a little more recent, right? They reformed the Judaism, and they came in about 1,000 years later. That's where we date the 2,000-year-old calendar, right? 2020, this is roughly to the beginning of Christianity. And the Muslims, when did they start? About 1,500 years ago, right? Yeah, they came after the Christians. So 7th century CE, the Muslims, and it's very, very interesting because all of them respect profoundly Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. The Muslims not so much Isaac and Jacob, but even so, you go to Hebron today, which for many years was a Muslim shrine, and they didn't destroy it. They cherished and revered Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. You go till today to Hebron, you see them covered in Arabic text. Right? They're not really related to Jacob. I mean, it's a distant cousin, and Isaac is a cousin. But Abraham was the father of Ishmael. Yet we see these tombs are covered with Arabic inscriptions because they considered them very holy places. As you drive up to Jerusalem today from the main road from Tel Aviv, I have not yet tried the new rail, the new train from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I hear it's like 25 minutes, 28 shekel. But when you come up from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem on the road, you look to the far left, you see the tallest point of Jerusalem. It's called Nebe Samuel, which in Arabic means Shmuel HaNavi. Shmuel HaNavi, which means the Prophet Samuel. That's where he's buried, right? In Arabic, because they revered that. Because they revered the Prophet Samuel, right? Our contributions to humanity were certainly religious, but not all of us realize, most of us don't realize, that of all the values that you all mentioned, every single one of those values, and many more, were actually novel contributions that Judaism introduced to the world. Not just that, but more than that, is that the contributions that Judaism introduced to the world, which we're going to be discussing in this course, are still not perfect. The way that we observe or adhere to these values is not yet the way that the Torah advises us to. So we might have accepted do unto others, but not fully. The Torah continues to challenge us to perfect our social justice, our kindness, our honesty, our integrity, and all of these other ideas that were brought up. And we have to look into the Torah in order to find the path to be able to perfect these values today. We look at the elections today, and what are they all arguing about? Everybody's trying to do the right thing. I think everybody's got the right idea. They're trying to be the best president of this country, bring this country to the best place. They all mean to do the right thing, but they've got very different ideas of how to do that. And the right to choose, or the right to life, all those kind of ideas are ideas that they're values that we try to give, to share, about mutual respect and tolerance. But it's when we look in the Torah, in this course, we'll be exposing not only the values that have already been introduced to the world, but also the values that we still need to be perfecting. Okay? It's an interesting text that I'd like to introduce you to in text number 1 on page 3 by none other than the second president of the United States, John Adams, who writes as follows. Page number 3. I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist of the other sect to believe or pretend to believe that all is ordered by chance, I should believe that chance has ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate. That's like a real oxymoron. I should believe that chance had ordered, right? The Jews to preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty, sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization. So John Adams makes it very clear that the Jews have provided an extraordinary contribution to the world from a religious perspective, introducing religion and the belief in an almighty sovereign power. It was Hitler, by the way, who writes in Mein Kampf that the Jews brought the curse of conscience to the world. Isn't that interesting? It's one of the reasons he hated us so much. But that's not so much what this course is about. It's not so much about the religious contributions. It's more about the values that we cherish as Americans today. And as someone that's a newly minted American citizen, it's something which I don't take for granted. Because coming from countries where those values are not really so free, where freedom isn't that free, coming to America, you realize how grateful we are to be in this great United States. And when we trace these values back to their origins in Torah, you see that we have a lot more work to do. And that's what we're going to discover today. Okay, so we said, let's talk about today's topic, which is the idea of social responsibility. So we got the general idea. We'll discuss it today, how social responsibility was a novelty introduced by the Torah, which was not anything to be taken for granted. But what are your limits of kindness? What are your limits of kindness? Take a look, if you don't mind, trying to answer this question on page 4 in exercise 1.2. If you could try to answer the two questions. Number 1, write down an instance in which you saw someone in need and helped them. Yeah, it's your book. You can write it. Why did you help them? And also write down an instance in which you saw someone in need and did not help them. Why did you not help them? Try to fill that one out. So hopefully this gives you a little opportunity to think a little bit about what the limits of kindness are. You see a kid playing in the middle of the road. You go over to him and say, oh, it's so lovely. Do you restrict yourself from disciplining the kid when he's playing with fire? Or do you show some tough love? Right? Where do we draw the line in kindness? There has to be a line somewhere. And as human beings, where we will be faced with dilemmas, which are inevitable. Let's take a look at the values that the Torah introduces us to when it comes to social responsibility and the limits of social responsibility, for us to be able to understand the context in which this law, these values were given to us by God, and how we can apply them in our lives today. And maybe even how we vote. You never know how you want to apply these values. Do you give money to any beggar who asks? No?
No, yeah, I do.
You do? Yeah?
Yes.
Anyone?
Usually.
Right? It's an interesting question. You see right here.
Yeah.
We're conflicted. Right? What happens if he's got needles sticking out of his arm?
I just do.
You'll do it anyways.
Yes.
You might be hurting them.
Oh, you mean heroin needles? Yes. Oh,
Those
Well-
kinds of needles.
What kind of needles you're thinking about? But yeah.
Sometimes you're just enabling.
That's right. So where do we draw the line, all right? Let's take a look at this. Let's develop this theme. Caring for others is very, very much a Jewish trait. It's central to Judaism, and it's a defining feature of our founders. Two of our earliest biblical figures exhibited these traits. One was Noah, and the other, Abraham. Now, all of us come from Noah. Noah was the one who lived during the time of the great flood. He was the one that floated the ark and saved his family from the great deluge. Yet we don't consider ourselves the children of Noah. We all biologically come from Noah. There's no other human being you could have come from, because he was the only survivor. Him and his wife and 3 sons and their wives. But it's only 10 generations after Noah that we're introduced to Abraham. And he's considered the first Jew. Abraham's the first Jew. He's the one to which we attribute ourselves. We say every time we do a bris, La'achnisai bivrisai shel Avraham Avinu, to bring him in the bris, in the covenant of Abraham our father. Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father. We don't say Noach Avinu, Noach our father. Why not? What's the difference? The difference is how they responded to the dilemmas that they were in. Do you remember? How did Noah respond to his dilemma? How did Abraham respond to his dilemma? Noah lived at a time when God tells him, listen, I'm here to destroy the world. The situation is bleak. You're going to have to build a boat. Right? So what does Noah say? Okay. And he gets to the task of building the boat. He does exactly what God tells him to do. Is that right or wrong? Did he do the right thing or the wrong thing?
Right.
He did the right thing? He did exactly what God commanded him to do. Done. Finito.
Or didn't he question in the beginning?
No.
No.
The one who questioned was Abraham. Right? Noach did exactly as God commanded him. Yeah, when it comes 10 generations later to Abraham, God says to Abraham, there's this evil cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm going to destroy them. Sodom and Gomorrah is today where the Dead Sea is.
That's the soul.
The salt, the sulfur, the most concentrated salt and sulfur in the world. Nothing can live there. That's why it's called the Dead Sea. My parents were a few days ago at a place in the southern end of the Dead Sea, which is called Lot's wife. If you're familiar with the biblical story, Lot and his wife, that's Abraham's nephew, were running away. Long story in Genesis. Basically, she wasn't supposed to look. She did look, and she turned into a pillar of salt. So my father sent me the picture. You see this pillar of salt, which they say looks like a woman. If you look at it at a certain angle, maybe it looks like a woman. So it's called, they say that's the pillar of salt. That's Lot's wife. In any event, the Torah says that the angel came in. He took the whole plain in which these cities were resting, and he went and just turned it upside down, and now that's what happened. But that didn't happen without a fight, because Abraham, like Joe pointed out, didn't take this sitting down. Abraham says, really? Why would you do that? And he starts to negotiate with God. You can see this in text number 2 and text number 3. He starts to negotiate with God. He says, God, 1 second, why would you destroy throw out the baby with the bathwater? Maybe there's 50 righteous people over there, 10 for each of the 5 cities. And it'd be good. And he goes and he barters down to 45 and 40 and 35 and 30, until eventually he can't even pull together a minion of righteous people. And Abraham says, sorry, I guess there's nothing you can do. I can no longer, I rest my case. And that's when the angels proceed to destroy. So, in both cases, God was destroying 2 evil civilizations. The people in the times of Noah, they were flooded because they were very cruel to each other. They were exercising all sorts of... They weren't rebelling against God, by the way. They were evil to each other. There was stories in the Talmud about a woman, an old widow who was trying to sell peanuts. So she had, just trying to sell peanuts. So she has 100 peanuts and she's trying to make some money to eat something for the day. So a guy comes over and he says, can I taste one just to see what it tastes like? Yeah, that's it. 100 people come by to taste 1 peanut. What happens? And they deliberately leave this woman, destitute, right? So they were very evil to each other. In the days of Abraham, Sodom and Gomorrah, also very wicked. They had HOA zoning laws banning hospitality. Banning hospitality. You were not allowed to have guests. And there was a whole story about a woman who actually fed a poor person. And they gave her a horrible death. They gave her a horrible death because she was kind to strangers. You weren't allowed to do that. There was a rule in Sodom, when a poor person came by, they would give him a gold coin or a bar of gold and hand your name engraved on it. And everybody knew that when a poor person comes with gold, you don't use gold that has engravings on it. So he feels like they're the most hospitable, charitable people. Everyone's giving him gold coins, but nobody's willing to do business with him with his gold because it's got people's names on it. Eventually the guy dies from starvation. And then when he dies, with a little pekalev of gold coins, he dies a rich man, right? Everybody comes back and they claim back their gold coins. They were very evil, very cruel. This is the days of Sodom. Would you be able to stand up and defend people like this? Chana, no, right? You wouldn't. You said no, right? I thought you said no. Was that you or someone else?
I hope not.
You said you hope?
I wouldn't defend them.
You hope that you would not defend them. Well, Noah didn't defend them. He just said, you want me to build a boat? Okay, when do we start? Abraham says he fights for them. He tries to defend them. He says, maybe they're righteous. Maybe they're not so wicked. Maybe you're judging them the wrong way. Maybe you should look into them from a different perspective, and he's not able to break through. That is the defining characteristic of the first Jew. The idea of unconditional kindness even to the undeserving. Even to those that are wicked. You're not talking about nice neighbors. You're talking about the bad neighbors. Like the real bad crowd. That is the defining character of Abraham. And that's the reason why Abraham was considered our first father. The first Jew. We are the children of Abraham. You remember the story when Abraham had his bris. And on the third day after the bris, he was sitting outside of his tent. He was trying to welcome guests in the desert, if you're familiar with the story. And he was very upset because God made it very hot. And he didn't want any guests to come and bother him because apparently 72 hours after a surgery is when it hurts the most. And God saw how pained Abraham was, so he sends him 3 angels that looked like men. And that was the whole story, in the Torah. And Abraham welcomes them in. First thing he does, he washes their feet, because these Arabs in that area would typically worship the dust on their feet. They were pagans, they were idol worshippers. But Abraham didn't say, oh, pagans, idol worshippers, I'm not interested in welcoming such simple and maybe evil idol worshippers into my home. He's like, no, just leave your idols outside and come into my house for hospitality. That's the kindness exhibited by Abraham. On the flip side, Noah, the flood is called the flood of Noah. May Noah, the waters of Noah. Why? Because he is considered responsible for the flood. Why? Because he didn't protest. Had he protested, the Zohar says he would have been successful in saving humanity. That's called the flood of Noah. And that's the reason why Abraham was chosen as our first father. Take a look at this text, please, on page 7 from Genesis. Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him, and we see that coming true today, 55% of humanity. For I love Abraham. Why? Because he instructs his children and his household to follow the path of God by doing charity and justice. Tzedakah mishpat. Mishpat means justice. Tzedakah means charity. We'll be exploring this word a little bit more soon. But generally speaking, he's kind to others. That's the defining character of the first Jew, and that's what defines us as Jews specifically. This social caring exemplified by Abraham is key to Judaism, and it's the key to the Aravim doctrine. The Aravim doctrine, Aravim means guarantors. The doctrine of mutual guarantee. Every one of us, as Jews, are guarantors for each other. Take a look at that in the Medrash, page number 7, text 5. All Jews are responsible for each other. We are like a ship where a hole has been ruptured in one single cabin. It cannot be said that one cabin has been ruptured. The entire ship is at stake, is in danger. You got one cabin that's got a hole inside. You can't say, well, the hole's not under my seat, so I'm not worried about this. The whole ship's going to sink. We're all responsible one for the other. And that is the principle of social responsibility, which we are introduced to at the very beginning, at the very onset of our people. When Abraham stands up to defend these wicked residents of Sodom, this is the founding principle. This principle of mutual responsibility, guarantors, is the founding principle of many of our mitzvahs in Judaism. You know, there's a mitzvah that says that if you're walking along the way and you see your enemy's donkey crouching under its load, you shall not ignore him, rather you shall surely assist him. Right? What that means in today's version, you're driving down I-95 and you see your competitor's Mercedes-Benz broken on the side of the road. You don't gloat. You stop and you give him a jump, right? That's what it means, right? That's what it means, right? So that would be the principle of mutual responsibility. You're supposed to save someone else from danger. If you see someone else drowning, you're not allowed to just stand idly by and say, well, can't swim, or I don't want to get my clothing wet. You've got to put yourself even in a state of danger in order to save another person. How much more so if it's not just physical danger, but spiritual danger. In America, I think they call this the Good Samaritan Law. Right, the Good Samaritan Law? When someone breaks someone else's property in order to save their lives. They can't be sued. You know this? Are you familiar with this law?
Yes.
That when somebody, basically, if you break down someone's door, you see a house on fire, you break down the door in order to save them from the fire. In America, they could probably sue you for breaking the door. They probably would sue you. The Good Samaritan Law protects them from that. Because the guy went out of his way. In Torah, and even in Israel today, it's not just a nice gesture to help someone in danger. It's actually an obligation. In Israel, this is a part of the law which actually makes it obligated for you to help another person. And one very important example of this principle of social responsibility is the mitzvah of tzedakah. The mitzvah of tzedakah, charity, helping the poor, in its very many forms. We're going to introduce you to 8 different forms of charity right now. You ready? All of them are biblical origin. Let's take a look on the screen. You can see this actually, if you want, on page 9 as well. Here. So, the first principle, again, you can follow in the book on page 9. You can follow on the screen if you want. There's a principle that we're living in an agricultural society. There's the law, the mitzvah. These are all 613 commandments. Each one of these. 613 commandments. One of them is the law of payah. You own a field. You're not allowed to harvest the entire field. You have to leave a corner of the field unharvested for who?
The poor.
For the poor. It's called the corner. Payah means a corner. Same word as payas over here. Payas means the corners of your beard. You're not allowed to, the corners of your head. You're not allowed to shave the corners of your head. We just learned about that in the morning minyan, right? Same way you're not allowed to shave the corners of your head, you're not allowed to shave the corners of your field. It's an interesting connection there. Heads and fields are connected, right? Because you've got to leave that for the poor. That they don't own the fields, they didn't work for it. You have got to watch out for them, number 1. Number 2, there's the law of Lacket, which is fallen produce. When you do collect your produce from the field, if under certain circumstances you put your harvest into bundles, the produce that falls to the floor, you're not allowed to go back and collect it. You got to leave it for the poor. A third one is Shifa. This is a very interesting law. Most other commandments you observe with conscious mindfulness. This is the only mitzvah that you cannot fulfill mindfully. The only way to fulfill this mitzvah is mindlessly, because shichacha means to forget. If you forgot some produce, forgot a bundle or 2 out in the field, you thought you're done, and then you look out and you say, oh, I left that one, you can't go back and get them, those have to remain for the poor. And so on, there's 3 more over here. There's parrot, this goes to the vineyard. Parrot is fallen grapes while vine is being picked. It's similar to the fields. Olalot is small bunches of grapes that have to stay on the vine. And finally, there's this interesting one, which is Meiser Ani, the tithe of produce that you have to give to the poor. All of these, as you can see in page number 9, are of biblical origin. You see the source on the right-hand side. Every single one of them is of biblical origin. This is the principle of tzedakah in some of its forms, only 6 forms which we presented you with over here, all based upon the principle of mutual responsibility, caring for each other. Now, things get interesting. In the 15th century, I think it was, when, 13th, 14th century, when there was a conflict in the Jewish community in Spain. Is the obligation as Jewish people, is the Torah's obligation to care for the poor, that an obligation of the community or of the individual? What's the difference? Lemay nafka mina, in the words of the Talmud. What would be the difference? The question was raised by 2 groups on the screen. Is it individual discretion or is it common obligation? You see, the wealthy said, sorry. Think about this second. The wealthy said that it's up to the individual. That's what they said. The wealthy said that the poor need to be knocking on doors. They have to knock on every single door, and every individual has to give them what he can, what he wants. But the middle class argued against that. They said, no, the poor should not be knocking on the door. It's not the obligation of the individual. It's the obligation of the community to take care of the poor. What should happen is that there should be a communal tax, a tzedakah tax. Within each Jewish community, everybody contributes towards a fund, and the fund provides directly to the poor. Right? Do you understand the difference? What will be the difference? The question is, if we're giving each person according to his own ability, according to your own wealth, or not. You see, if the poor are going door to door, then everybody's taking part, is being solicited directly by the poor, right? But if you're giving as a community, then the community looks at your tax returns. They say, well, you have a 9-bedroom house, it's worth $4 million, so you should be giving more than the guy in a studio apartment, right, without an elevator, right, worth $40,000. Right? There should be a difference. The rich need to be giving more, the poor need to be giving less. When you go as a common obligation, the rich will be giving the lion's share of the taxes. Right? This is where you think about it, today's debates about the billionaires' taxes and not the billionaires' taxes. I'm not getting political, but you can apply this whichever way you want. But it's just an interesting question, right? Should the rich be giving more because they have more? Or should every person be giving equally? Should the poor go and get $10 from every single house? Or should they be getting $1,000 from the rich and $1 from the poor? Larry, what do you say?
What about demeaning the individual has to not pay the poor?
The degradation? You said demeaning.
A poor person who demeans himself by having to go and beg.
So what do you feel about that?
You go to the community structure where they don't have to demean themselves in order
That's
to
certainly a tremendous benefit. Certainly tremendous benefit to
Let people keep their respect.
help people keep their respect. Because remember, when people are poor, they're not always obviously poor. Sometimes they just fell on hard times. Maybe the bank called in the loan, right? Yesterday they were very successful. Now the bank called in the loan, Bernie Madoff, whatever, clawback something, right? Assessment, medical bill, wasn't covered by insurance something. And now the people that you thought yesterday are pretty well off and they still drive a nice car, now they have nothing. So if they're able to go, to some with discretion, they can speak to somebody in private, it's going to maintain their dignity. It's a tremendous benefit. So you would certainly argue in favor, you would side with the middle class then in that case, right?
I would side with the concept of it being handled by a societal group, but I would also say that it should be based somewhat on the wealth of the individuals.
Okay, so you like a hybrid.
I would combine the two concepts.
Okay, so you're a bit of this, a bit of that. Okay, fine, fair enough. Anybody else want to comment? Yes, Stacy.
So, well, as for the individual discretion, if the poor are going from house to house, why is every house given the same? Maybe one house to 12.
The difference is when it's a communal tax, it's far more organized. That's when everybody knows what you're supposed to be given. There's assessments. It's like the HOA. They expect a certain amount from, it's like I guess the tax collector that sends you the bill and says, well, today your house is worth this much, so your taxes are going to be this much. They don't ask you, they tell you, right? Whereas when the guy knocks on your door, you can really do whatever you want. It's far less organized. Yeah.
But if it's a communal obligation, how do we really know that the poor are getting that money, getting the help?
Well, you have to trust the
Trust
guys in charge.
That's a whole other question. Whether it's being
Look, if you don't trust the guys in charge of the charity fund, you probably should not be giving to that charity fund. Right?
Well, you're talking about a charity fund rather than
Government agency.
Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. I mean, $50 billion to the Palestinians, where's that going? into tunnels building. Who knows where that's going? They're very good at underground construction. It's the above ground construction department we're struggling with, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's both. I think you should have a communal obligation. My personal feeling is that those who have more should have a private obligation to want to give in addition to. Because there are people who don't want to go to the community. They want to go to somebody privately. It's just between the two of them. And I think the two of them have to work hand in hand to a certain extent.
Okay, so to your point about the poor going to private individuals, maybe they prefer it that way. Let's take a look at 3 texts that I want to share with you that will help us lead towards this clarity. On page 11, we quote now from Maimonides. This is a very famous text from Maimonides about the 8 levels of charity. Have you ever heard of the 8 levels of charity? The highest form of charity, the lowest form of charity. There's 8 levels of giving charity. You'll see right now? Yeah. So, text 8a. A high form of charity is to give to the poor without the givers knowing to whom they give, and without the recipients knowing from whom they receive. As Karen correctly pointed out, this is total anonymity, as opposed to levels 7 and 6, which are partial anonymity. That's where the giver knows the recipient, but not vice versa, or the recipient knows the giver, but not vice versa, right? There's different ways to do that. That's 8, 7, and 6. It's all degrees of anonymity, right? All to do with Larry's point, which is the dignity of the recipient, right? It's all got to do with dignity, which means that if someone needed to receive charity, and nobody knows who the recipient is, and nobody knows who the giver is, there's great dignity. But if you don't know who gave it to you, but you know that someone knows that you got it, diminished, right? And vice versa. Yeah, Karen.
I was going to say, I've given anonymously before, where I don't know who I'm giving to, nor do they know that I gave. And I have to say, that's the most rewarding form of charity I ever give. Because I don't want to know who I necessarily give it to. That's not important. That's not the object. The object is that you're giving.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, the way I often experience that from a slightly different perspective is when people give me charity to my rabbi's discretionary fund in order to distribute on my discretion.
Well, you have to be the middleman. That's
Right,
different.
exactly.
As a
So
rabbi.
I'm seeing that different perspective from the other side, where you're giving to me to distribute to them.
Right.
So you don't know who's getting, and I won't tell you.
Nor do
You don't want to know.
I want to know.
But so they know, right? They know that the donors don't know who they are.
And even though you're the middleman, it's still anonymous.
Yeah, but of course, it stays. What happens in Vegas, right?
Yeah.
Stays in Vegas, right? Yes, I'm sorry. And
Implicit in all this, and the Maimonides approach, is that you got freedom of choice, and it's up to the individual to decide who he wants to be, what he wants to do. As opposed to that, which in essence says you take away the freedom of choice and you make a sort of a government organization that takes from the.
No, I'm seeing it differently, actually, Andy. I'm seeing it differently. Let's just finish the text because we're in the middle of the text, and I want to make sure that you're not missing a very critical thing of here. So this is what Maimonides says: "For this is performing a mitzvah solely for the sake of heaven, and not for any dignity not for any recognition or a reward. Giving to a charity fund," says Maimonides, "is similar to this mode of charity. When you give to a charity fund, there's total anonymity. As opposed to what Steve said, that when they go door to door, there is zero anonymity. Right? So the charity fund actually protects the dignity. Like the rabbi's discretionary fund, where you said, I'm different. Because there is a total privacy, confidentiality that you have with your rabbi. You're supposed to have.
That wasn't what I was saying. I said you should have the community obligation.
Right.
And then in addition to that people should be able to give
Okay,
on their own.
sure. We don't want to withhold anybody from giving whatever they want. That in addition, no problem. But let's keep on going here. A lesser level than that is when the givers do not know to whom they give, but the poor know their benefactors. For example, the sages used to tie coins into cloths and throw them behind their backs so that the poor would be able to come and take the coins out of the cloths without being ashamed. Right? So they would throw it over their backs. The poor knew who the givers were. The givers did not know who was receiving. So that's the first thing. From the levels of tzedakah, we learn the importance of giving to a charity fund because of the degree of anonymity, which protects the dignity. But now let's look at another point. This is from the Talmud now, over the page, on page 12, when it comes to communal funds. Is it really true that the collectors for the communal charity fund may seize contributions? But doesn't the verse state, I will punish all that oppress them? And Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta expounded in the name of Rav, God will mete out punishment even to charity collectors. This seems to imply that charity collectors are able to seize. Right? That's pretty intense. If charity collectors are permitted to compel people to contribute charity, then why are they counted amongst Israel's oppressors? We've got to make up our minds. Are the charity collectors allowed to seize for charity for the communal fund? Or are they overstepping their boundaries by seizing people's assets for the communal fund? This is not a difficulty, the Talmud rules. When the contributors are wealthy and have not contributed what they are capable of, the collectors may seize money from them. However, when the contributors are not wealthy and the collectors are seizing more than they are capable of giving, that's when the collectors are termed oppressors of Israel. This right to compel the wealthy to contribute is illustrated in the case of Rabbi, who seized 400 dinars from Rav Natan bar Ami for charity. So here we're suddenly introduced to this idea that there's different levels of giving according to your level. Right? You're supposed to give as much as you can afford, and if you're not giving as much as you can afford, then you're lacking. As we see in the next case, Nakdimon ben Gurion was one of the wealthiest people in Jerusalem at the time of the destruction of the temple, the fall of Jerusalem in the hands of the Romans. And look what happened. He became very, very poor. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai met the daughter of Nakdimon ben Gurion. She was actually collecting dung in the field. She was so poor. In their conversation, she told him that her father had not been charitable. That's what she said. My father, and that's why we lost our money, because dad wasn't charitable. But didn't Nakdimon ben Gurion give charity? Of course he did. Indeed, a brighter states that people would say about Nakdimon ben Gurion that when he would leave his home to go to the study hall, his attendants would spread fine woolen garments underneath for him to walk on, and he would allow the poor to follow him and take the expensive garments for themselves. Right? It's a pretty ostentatious way of walking to shul, but at least he let them keep the expensive tapestries, you know? So clearly he was giving charity. Although Nakdimon gave much charity, the Talmud rules, in proportion to his wealth, he didn't give as much as he should have. As the saying goes, the burden is set according to the strength of the camel. L'fum gam l'shichna. According to the camel is the load. That is a basic principle in Torah. You're supposed to give as much as you can afford. So if you can afford to give 100,000 and you gave 1,000, then you're sorely lacking. Whereas the guy that can only afford to give 500 and he gave 1,000, that's unbelievable. Because according to your load, you could have afforded 100,000, you gave only 1,000. That's not acceptable. And based upon these three texts that we just shared with you, the debate between the wealthy and the middle class was settled by the Rabbi, the Rashba, the famous Rashba, 14th century scholar. He ruled. How would you rule based upon this? Who's right, the wealthy or the middle class? Is it an individual or communal? Clearly, we have to extol the virtues of a communal tzedakah fund, which protects the dignity of the individual collector, the poor, from knocking door to door and humiliating themselves. Right? That's the highest form of charity. And everybody has to give according to their level, which is why the tzedakah administrators need to be talking to each individual about what they can afford and not one size fits all. And that's what the wealthy did not want. They didn't want to have a communal fund where they'd be giving more than other people. They wanted the poor to go direct door to door. That's why the Rashba ruled that it was degrading to send them door to door because of the dignity of the poor, and to the rich who said that times were tough The Rashba caustically responded. He said, times are tough, there's not enough money. I don't have enough money to give. He said, apparently, even common sense is in short supply now. Not just money, right? And I have to tell you that this principle was the standard in many, many, many Jewish communities. To have a tzedakah communal tax, which created a tzedakah fund that allowed the poor of that city to be taken care of. It's always been that way in Jewish communities. And that's the rabbi's discretionary fund. That's really what it is. So much so, we find an English priest, the writings of an English priest who spent time in North Africa. He was writing about a claim that the Jews don't have any beggars. He traveled, he got to know the Jewish community in Morocco and North Africa. And regarding the claim that Jews have no beggars, the Jews have all the money, right? This is where it comes from. The Jews control the banks, right? Where you have some nefarious plot to take over the world. Take a look at how he writes about this. Lancelot Edison in The Present State of the Jews. Page 14. Those who have observed that the Jews have no beggars seemed not well informed of the manner of their alms and their way of providing for the poor. For it is true that we may not reckon these people amongst beggars, as that word usually implies seeking relief from house to house. For though among the Jews in Barbary, that's North Africa, there is great store of needy persons, yet they are supplied for in a manner which much conceals to men of other religions their poverty. For the wealthier take care to provide for them, and very much glorify their religion upon this very score, that they live under its profession in a more mutual charity of alms than even the Moor or the Christian, both of which I have heard upbraiding their common beggars with great insult. So the Muslims and the Christians have been insulting towards their beggars, towards their lower class, but the Jews are very respectful to their lower class. And they take care of them with such dignity that you don't even know who the poor are. That's why you think that the Jews have no beggars, because they're all taken care of with such dignity. And it cannot be denied that the Jews' manner of relieving their poor is proper and commendable. Nice, right? This is nice stuff. It's inspiring. It's good to see this. But here begins the challenge to find. So we see that Judaism and Torah introduced this idea of caring for the poor, which all the presidential candidates are arguing about. I'm going to take care of the poor this way. I'm going to take care of the poor that way. Everybody's more righteous than the other. It's all wonderful. Everybody's trying to compete to be more righteous, right? If only it was like that 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 50 years ago, right? So yeah, it's nice that these are principles that clearly have their roots in Torah. But there's even a greater chidush. The word is chidush, which means a novelty in Torah when it comes to our social responsibility. And that is, not only are you supposed to provide for the poor, you're also supposed to make sure that they don't get poor in the first place. Let's take a look, page 15. This is from Maimonides. The highest form of charity, exceeded by none, is that of a person who assists poor Jews by providing them with a gift or loan, or making a business partnership with them, or by finding them employment, supporting them so that they will not come to need another person's help. This charity is really the highest form of charity. We spoke before about anonymity, helping the guy that's already down in the gutter. But what about the guy that's falling down? Give him a job. Don't give him a fishing rod. Give him a fish, right? No, give him a fish and feed him for a day, right? Give him a fishing rod and you'll teach him how to provide for his family for the rest of his life, right? That's the highest form of charity. And that's the ideal that we're striving for right now. This ideal is echoed by the law of Yovel. Have you ever heard of the law of Yovel? The law of the Jubilee year. Have you heard of the sabbatical year? Yes. So the sabbatical is every 7 years. Every 7 years you're not allowed to farm the land of Israel. I'm not even going to get into that law. That's a very interesting law. Every 7 years till this very day in Israel, you're not allowed to farm the land of Israel. You got to leave the fields fallow, go and study Torah, trust in God. God will provide, quite literally, and you have to just trust. But every 7 sabbatical years, you reach the Jubilee year. And the law of the Jubilee year is fascinating. Page 15. You shall give the land as an inheritance to your families. This is when they came to conquer the promised land. A large family shall be given a larger inheritance, and a smaller family should receive a smaller inheritance. So every Jewish family, from the beginning of time, since they came and conquered the land with Moses, with Joshua, received a portion of the land. The text continues in 12a. What happens if they sell this land? If your fellow becomes poor and sells some of his inherited property, his nearest relative shall come and redeem his relative's sale, should buy it back for him. If there is no one to redeem it for him, but he later prospers and gains sufficient means to redeem it himself, he shall calculate the value of yours for which the land has been sold, and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it. So let's say you own a field and you sold it for $50,000. Let's say, right? 25 years later, you decide that you have enough money now to buy it back. So you calculate $50,000 was for 50 years of use. Therefore, it's $1,000 a year. I only owe you $25,000 because you've already used $25,000 worth, right? He gives him the $25,000 and he gets it back. He can then return to his inheritance. But if he cannot afford to repay the buyer, what was sold shall remain in the buyer's possession until the Jubilee year. Then in the Jubilee year, the land shall revert to the possession of its ancestral owner. In Israel, there is no such concept as land sales. There is only a maximum of 50-year leases. After 49 years, the land automatically returns back to the original owners. And this way, the biblical owners, the biblical families that received the inheritance in the days of Joshua will always maintain that land in their possession, in their family's possession. They will always have a piece of land to grow their vegetables on. Something where they'll be able to live rent-free. Somewhere where they own real estate. There's no such thing as a sale of land in Israel. It is always only a lease for a maximum, no more ever, than 50 years. Why? What's the logic? What do you think? What? Because the land belongs to God. You're getting a little deep over there, so I'm going to hold that for a second. Land belongs to God. Let's keep it a little bit financial for a moment. The reason the land stays in the hands of the buyer, returns back to the seller, is in order to maintain the dignity of the seller, that a poor person should never be condemned to live in poverty without hope. See this in the words of the commentary on page 17. God established the Jubilee laws of the return of the land because one's livelihood depends on the possession of fields that generate produce. That's why they're called real estates. They're real. This is the real deal, right? God doesn't want a person to be left without a means of livelihood, and therefore instituted that the land cannot be sold forever. Yes, Larry?
The established state of Israel in 1948 establishes this law. Prior to that time, what controls over land? This doesn't make, from my legal viewpoint, any sense whatsoever, because Palestine did not have those laws in effect. Those lands were probably titled in accordance with English law. So I don't know how this...
But what preceded the English law? You're asking a question, Larry. How to apply the principle today? That's a different discussion. You want to know, if you buy a house in Jerusalem, this might belong to someone else. I spent $2 million dollars on a house in Jerusalem to find out that I've only got 3 years left before the Jubilee. That's a pretty expensive lease, right?
That's really not what I'm saying.
So what's your question?
How did those laws apply before the state of Israel came into effect?
We don't apply these laws today. The laws of Jubilee aren't in effect today in Israel. The law of Jubilee is not actually in effect. The law of sabbatical every 7th year is applicable, but we only apply the laws of Jubilee when there's a Jewish monarch in the land of Israel. So right now they don't apply.
You did say there's a 50-year lease law.
I didn't say it's in effect. The law of Jubilee is a value in Torah. It's a principle in Torah.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
But it's not, remember, out of 613 commandments, not every one of them is valid today. We have 613 commandments, but only about 150 of them we can actually observe today. Because the vast majority apply only when there is a temple and a Jewish monarch, and the majority of the people live in the land of Israel. So the law is not in effect today, and how we actually use it today is a different story. We're talking about the principle right now. You okay with that?
No, I got the principle, but I don't.
That's all we're talking about, just the principle.
But you stated that there's only 50-year leases in Israel today.
No, I'm sorry. Then I misspoke. When I said today, I should not have said the word today. I meant in biblical Israel.
Everybody raised their hand and heard it the other way.
I'm so sorry. Sorry, my apologies. Listen. No, my apologies. If that's what, you know what? You're a lawyer, right? So, there you go. You're listening to me from a legal perspective. Fair enough. I concede. So I erred in my speech. I didn't mean today, but I misspoke. Exactly.
You're too kind.
There you go. Ilan.
There is an interesting situation in Israel, I think, where there's a government body that owns the current family, which owns much of the land, and you buy a house or an apartment or property, and you do actually, it's not 50 years, I think it's 99 years, you get a lease for, not giving you a year or something.
In this country.
No, in Israel.
Israel.
So you're saying there is a law in the Knesset?
It's not a law, it's
It's a
much,
man-made law.
it's man-made, it's not some biblical, much of the land that was bought at the time of the creation of the state of Israel was bought by,
That's the origin, that's what I was.
well, but I don't know if that, it was bought by the Karen Family, and they own the land, and then they lease it to.
Oh, they do 99-year leases.
99-year
Okay.
leases or whatever, so-
All right, interesting.
So it's probably based on.
But look, I don't want to get lost in how it works today because that's not what this is about. I don't want to hijack the idea. I want to get back to the principle. The principle is how the Torah exhibits such tremendous dignity, even to the fella that was so down on his luck that he had to sell the ground beneath his feet to make ends meet. He was a shlemazel. He obviously did not know what he was doing. Did a bad investment. He sold the land. It didn't work out. And now, does that mean he's condemned to live in poverty forever? No. There's hope. Every 50 years. Every 50 years, it's like a rebirth, a refreshing back to our basic values, right? Let's summarize what we've learned so far on the screen here, okay? So we've learned here that, the Torah's approach to charity is two levels. First of all, we talk about the dignity of the poor. We spoke about the dignity of the poor as well as protecting them from falling into poverty. Right? This is a little mixed up here. Right? You're supposed... Whatever, I'm just going to leave it like that. So we spoke about the dignity of the poor, which was more of a... we spoke about the Communal Funds, and more important than even dealing with them when they're already poor is preventing them from falling into poverty in the first place. We said this is not just a personal obligation where you should give them a job, for example, but also on a communal level, there's an obligation for society as a whole. For example, the Jubilee Law is something which is a legal thing applied by the rule of government to make sure that everybody is able to go back to their original assets. And for those that fall through the cracks still, if they still are down in their life, you still have a tzedakah tax, which is the communal tax, to make sure that they are able to receive what they need with dignity. What's the logic behind it all?
Prevent a continual cycle of poverty.
Why are we so obsessed with the poor?
People can have.
But why are we so obsessed with the poor? Why? I understand. So we want people to have hope. But why do we care so much about the poor?
We have a moral responsibility to people.
Why do we have such a moral responsibility for people?
If they're fellow men.
It's a question of prioritization, right? Because if I have to prioritize studying Torah or thinking about God versus getting my next meal, well, surviving may be even more important than my connection to Hashem, right? So, I don't know.
So you're not sure.
That's what makes us human. That's what makes us human.
Right,
So you're saying, Edna, you're suggesting
providing support, we lift everybody, but we also give the opportunity.
united we stand, divided we
But
fall.
also people that are less fortunate, you give the opportunity to have some stability, where they can come into the fold, perhaps?
So, one second. Hang on. So, you what?
I think it should be more elementary than that. I think, but for the grace of God, we all could be poor. We all could be out of a job. We all could be on the balls of
A
our
little more realistic, right?
You know, be careful. What is the expression? They always say, be good to those people going up because on the way down they could be your boss.
Right.
I mean, you don't know. You could have a great year one year and next year not such
Right.
a great year, and you might.
You know,
be
King
dead.
Solomon says, "Leila chachamim lechem." Bread doesn't go to the wise. Bread doesn't go to the wise. You know, don't think Zuckerberg is such a genius or Page or whatever. That's a genius. Says it's a mazel. It's not something about the mazel. Something, you know, the wheel turns. Edna, you said something interesting. You said that it makes us human.
That's humanity.
Does that mean that if we don't care for the poor, we're not human? You're not human?
We're animals if we don't help.
Interesting perspective. Steve, what did you say in the back there?
We are our brother's keeper. It's like we are one family, and if we take care of our own, then we will take care of everybody.
I want to take you one step deeper, and that's something which Sai pointed out earlier. I want to take you one level deeper. The reason, why should we give of my hard-earned money, excuse me, to someone else, right? Why should I give to someone else? You know the story of a guy walking down the street in Manhattan, businessman. He sees a beggar, and he says, "Could you spare a dime?" He says, "I'm sorry, I don't have any money. I don't have any money." So the beggar says, "Get a job." That's my hard-earned money. Why? I just want to develop the theme of Yossi. So why should I be giving my hard-earned money to someone else? Someone else, you get a job, right? Why is your loss, your lack, my problem? The reason is a beautiful concept that everything belongs to God, and nothing belongs to us. Let's see this in the text, page 17, text 13. The land shall not be sold permanently. Why? Because the land is actually mine, and you reside in my land as temporary dwellers and residents. It's not your land. We live in a culture today that says, I can do whatever I want with my life. I can do whatever I want with my life, right? It's my body, it's my life, it's my house. I can do whatever I want because I own my body. If I want to do tattoos all over my body, you can't tell me what to do, right? If I want to do an abortion, I can do an abortion. It's none of your business, right? And Torah tells us, sorry, it's not your body. Your body is actually leased to you by God, not your possession. It's like a taxi. You get into a taxi, and you should be respectful of the taxi. So when you leave the taxi in the same way that you came into the taxi. But imagine you decide in the middle of the taxi, I'm hungry, I'm going to start cooking dinner, right? So you light a fire, right? I mean, you can't do that. That's why it says you come from earth, and to earth you shall return. This is not poetic. This is because you're supposed to return the body in the same format in which you received it, right? I mentioned to the Morning Minion guys that if you lease a Mercedes-Benz, and if after 2 years you decide to return it to them in an urn, they're not going to be very appreciative of your cremated remains of their Mercedes-Benz. You're supposed to return it in the same way you got it, right? Which is why suicide is not allowed. Suicide is self-murder. According to Torah, suicide is self-murder. You're murdering yourself. So if you're murdering someone else, you're murdering yourself. It's the same thing. You're taking away human life you don't own. That's not yours. Life belongs to God, right? Land belongs to God. And one step further, money also belongs to God. Let's take a look at text 14. Just want you to see this one on page 18. Do not say, this is the code of Jewish law, do not say, why should I deplete my funds by giving of them to the poor? Why should I lose from my hard-earned money? Understand that the money is not truly yours, but is a trust from God that must be administered in accordance to the wishes of the trust's owner. God's wish is that you disperse from the trust to the poor. So somebody passes away without kids, and he makes you the trustee of his estate. Does this mean you can blow the funds on whatever you want? You got to follow the trust, the rules of the trust. This is a federal law. I'm sure that if you would mess around with that, then you'd be making a federal crime, right? The money's not yours. And with that perspective, we say, God is so nice to us. Because out of the money that's not mine, is his, he actually lets me do whatever I want with 90%. And only 10% of my earnings, he asks me to choose who I want to give it to. Which tzedakah I want to give it to. He's not even asking for 50% retainer. He's asking just for 10%. So instead of saying, I own 100%, it's my money, and now I have to give away 10% to charity, this is like painful, I say no. I'm looking at it from the other perspective. The money is all God's. He's letting me use it. And in fact, he's letting me keep 90% even though it's not really mine. Wow, that's really mighty generous of him. That's how we perceive our mutual responsibility for the poor. Recognizing that the poor is my brother and my sister. God put me in this world, put us in this world with the doctrine of mutual guarantors. We're all responsible for each other, like the hole underneath the cabin, someone else's cabin on the ship. If his cabin's going down, the whole ship is going down. And God says, you are not no man an island. You're not on your own. We're all mutually responsible, one for the other. And therefore, if someone else is in trouble, it's your obligation to fix that problem. Why? Because it's not your money. It's not your land. Ilan, you're going to say something.
It's a tangent, and you don't have to get into it. So if God owns everything, which I agree with, principle, is there anything that is our own?
Anything which is our own. Interesting questions. We don't own our bodies, which by the way means...
Are there any exceptions to that?
By the way, because we don't own our bodies, therefore no suicide, no cremation, no tattoos,
I don't
no...
own my land, I don't own my money, I don't own my ideas, I don't own my...
Well, I would think the one part...
I'm saying, I'm asking...
So what do you own?
What do you own from God's...
There is something that you own. There is something that you do own.
Free will.
Free will, yes.
And I'll tell you a story. When Sir Moses Montefiore was very much beloved by the Queen or King of England at the time, early 1900s, there were the anti-Semites that tried to slander him to the monarch, to say that he was stealing money and whatever, you know. So eventually the king came to Moses Montefiore and he said, tell me, Moses, how much are you worth? How much are you worth? So he said, I need 3 days to give you a number, do the accounting. He comes back and he gives him a number. I don't know, like 500,000 pounds, whatever. So the monarch becomes incensed and he says, I couldn't believe it, but now I see that they were right. You are hiding money from me. You are lying. Your real estate here, there, and the other itself is worth more than whatever number you just gave me. How can you lie to me in my face that that's all that you're worth? Says Moses to the monarch, Your Majesty, with all due respect, you didn't ask me how much money I have. You asked me how much I'm worth. See, the money that I have is, like you said, it's far more than the number I gave you. But what I am worth is what nobody can take away from me. Not even God. And that is what I have given to charity. That's the number that I gave you. What am I worth is what I've given to tzedakah. That's a mitzvah that nobody can take away from me. So the mitzvah is the good deeds that you've done. Nobody can take away. There is more legal application to what your question is. And yes, it is a tangent. I can't remember it right now. There is certain legal ramifications of certain parts of your life that you do actually have your own, they do belong to you. But I can't think of it right at this moment, so I'm going to move on from there, okay? But I want to illustrate the word tzedakah. What does tzedakah mean? Tzedakah means charity, right? Who said it? Righteousness. Who says charity? Charity.
It also
What
means
is?
return, doesn't it?
No, that's teshuvah. You're mixing. So tzedakah often is translated to mean charity. What does charity mean? Charity basically means taking care of the oisvars, right? Taking care of the less fortunate. That's what charity means. Your mother called you that? Sorry. Okay. So charity means taking care of those undeserving. But the word tzedakah in Hebrew comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. The word is not me on my high horse caring for the dregs of society. That's not what it means, as charity might imply. The word is justice. It means doing the right thing. God could have given the money straight to the poor person. He just trusts me that I'll do the right thing. There's a Talmud that says that Rabbi Mechabed Ashirim, Rabbi Yehuda the prince, the one who wrote down the Talmud from memory, from tradition of the oral law, he would honor the wealthy. Can you imagine a rabbi who would honor the wealthy? Can you imagine? A rabbi who cares only about the rich people in the community, doesn't care about the poor. Awful, right? Rabbi would shamelessly honor the rich. So people would say, Rabbi, how can you do this? And he would say as follows: really, the money comes from God, and God should have given everybody the same. But what did he do? He made a deficit by the poor person and made a credit by the rich person. He took the money away from the poor, gave it to the rich. Why? Because he trusts the rich guy that he's going to do the right thing, justice, and give it back to where it belongs. And if God trusts the rich, then why shouldn't I? Interesting. Interesting perspective, right? But that changes our perspective on how we view money and possessions and wealth. There's a headline I saw today, a house for sale somewhere, $500 million. Right? As how we view real estate and possessions and wealth and money. It's really a game changer. You know, there was a collector for tzedakah for one of the Chabad Rebbes. His name was Rabbi Mordechai Rivkin. He collected money in Russia for the yeshiva. You know the yeshiva, the clandestine yeshiva, which was running away from the Russians everywhere, the communists. And they had no money, and the kids had nothing to eat, and they were studying Torah, and this guy would go around collecting. So one time he came to a philanthropist or whatever, somebody who was able to give a little. And the guy said, listen, I'm falling on hard times, and I can't give you charity this year. I can't give tzedakah. So I'm sorry. Reb Mordechai looks at him and says, listen, let's discuss this. I'll give you the analogy of a man who goes to the business, to the fair, to the market, and he fills up his wagon with all sorts of goods. On the way back, there's a rainstorm, and the wagon gets stuck in a ditch. So what does the wagon driver tell him? He says, look, the wagon is too heavy. We're going to throw most of the goods off to lighten the load so we can get back on the road and get out of here. And we're stuck in the mud. So the merchant says, no, I can't throw away my merchandise. I just spent all my money on the wares. So I can't just dump them in the woods, in the forest, in the mud. Rather, let's take off the wheels. Let's get rid of the heavy wooden wheels. We don't need wheels. We need the merchandise, right? Obviously, it's absurd to say that we get rid of the wheels, right? Without wheels, you go nowhere, no matter how light your load is. Said Reb Mordechai, your tzedakah contributions is your wheels. It's not optional. You can't take this off your load to lighten your load. It's like taking the wheels off your wagon. If you don't have money, then spend less on this or spend less on that. But to compromise on your tzedakah, it's to compromise on the trust invested in you by Hashem. That would be to forfeit the very hand that to bite the very hand that feeds you. That would be literally taking off the wheels so that your merchandise will stay on the wagon, but it's not going to go anywhere. Because without tzedakah, you got nothing. And this truly changes everything. This is the Torah perspective to social responsibility. Not only are we there to take care of the poor, we're there to make sure they don't even fall poor in the first place. And even if they do, we've got our tzedakah funds to take care of them. To the point that the Gentiles don't even think that we have beggars. Right? That's a nice compliment. Today we all agree that charity is noble and important to society as well as to individuals. But it wasn't always this way. In the Greek culture, in the mighty Roman Empire, you find scant reference to anything related to helping the poor. Take a look here on page 19. Simply this states that the Greeks and the Romans did very little to help the poor. In Greek culture, the well-to-do were never expected to support and help the poor. The Greek word philanthropia never has the sense of our modern philanthropy. One is philanthropos towards one's own people. parents, other family members, guests, or strangers, not towards the poor. For exhortation to give alms to the poor, one looks in vain to Greek and Roman literature. Greek moralists do not admonish people to concern themselves about the fate of the poor, except incidentally when someone had been unexpectedly hit with a great catastrophe. To be sure, generosity, eleutheriotes, was praised as a virtue, but the poor were never singled out as its object. It was always directed to humans in general. Basically, there's very little concept of helping the poor, both in Romans and in Greek culture. The joy of giving was related only to honor, and certainly it had nothing to do with the poor. The Torah's way is completely novel. It's beautiful to see how the Torah teaches it. And today, thank God, this message, we've overcome the Romans and the Greeks. Today in the United States of America, this has become the norm. It has become the norm, and we're very proud of that. So when we look at it, the gift of charity to the poor was spread primarily through Christianity and Islam. The idea of helping the poor. The Romans and the Greeks were not very good at this. But the Christians and Islam and Muslims were pretty good at taking this Torah ideal and spreading it to humanity. But what about the rest of these ideas? Like charity being managed by communal authorities. This is not a principle that we find in Christian or Muslim cultures. Helping the poor provide for themselves and to structure an economy in a way that prevents poverty. We don't find these values in Christian or Muslim cultures. So how do these values come to America? Christians accepted almsgiving, not tzedakah taxes. They didn't accept this idea of dignity of the poor. Yet job training and poverty prevention is something which is alive and well in America today.
But don't Christians, or some parts of the Christian believe in the tithing to the church?
Tithing.
Church?
Right. Tithing to the church is that's the Torah concept.
Right.
The idea of giving.
But that did make it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we said giving charities is certainly an idea that they adopted. But these other details not. Here's a fascinating presentation.
But by tithing to the church is not like a communal.
Oh, like a communal fund? Maybe. Interesting point there. But let's watch it over here, and there's a fascinating presentation about how these values seep their way through from Torah straight to our values today in the United States of America.
Today, it is widely taken for granted that governments ought to offer various forms of care for the weaker elements of society and structure their economies to minimize poverty. But how and when did these priorities become the norm? The answer draws us back to the ancient saga of the rise and fall of the Roman Republic. Founded in 509 BCE, the Roman Republic was history's first representative democracy. Its citizens elected administrative bodies that ruled the state. That sounds progressive, but the Republic was structurally biased against its common citizens. The Republic was dominated by a Senate, operated by elite nobility, known as patricians, from the Latin word for fathers. All other citizens were called plebeians, or simply plebs, regular non-privileged people, and they operated a plebeian council with significantly lesser powers. Inequality was aggravated when the Republic captured vast territories and enslaved foreign populations. The nobility seized the land, along with the enormous slave force of captives, denying the ordinary plebs any share. This combination of free land and labor led to vast plantations for the elite, who then sold produce at greatly reduced prices, forcing plebeian farmers to abandon their small farms and denying jobs to Romans. The result was overcrowded cities filled with poor, unemployed citizens. Discontent simmered until, in the 2nd century BCE, two brothers rocked the foundations of Roman society. Tiberius Gracchus was elected to head the plebeian council, determined to improve the lot of his fellow commoners. his central policy was an agrarian law, enforcing the redistribution of conquered land that had been seized by the nobility. But the patrician Senate did not appreciate this legislation. The ensuing political crisis led to the murder of Tiberius and many of his supporters at the hands of a Senate-mobilized mob. Tiberius's brother Gaius tried to revive his slain brother's policies, but he met a similar bloody end. The patricians had stifled land ownership reform, but the strife unleashed by this conflict continued to ferment and eventually led to the collapse of the Roman Republic 1 century later. On the ruins of the Republic, the dictatorial Roman Empire arose. With their republic dead, ancient Roman historians analyzed its failures and arrived at a far-reaching conclusion. It was the fault of the Gracchi brothers' attempt to involve the government in economic reform. The Gracchi plan to level the playing field at the expense of the nobility's powerful monopoly had invited destabilizing class warfare. And therefore, all future governments must avoid legislation aimed at fair distributions of land or wealth at all costs. This way of thinking became an orthodoxy in political theory for the next millennia and a half. But in the 17th century, perspectives began to shift. The Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation led scholars to delve deeply into Jewish texts. The Hebrew Bible, its Jewish commentaries, the Talmud, Maimonides, Kabbalah, and Jewish history. One Dutch scholar, Petrus Cannaeus, born in 1586, made a compelling case for modeling contemporary European society on what he called the Hebrew Republic, the ancient civilization established by the Jews in the Holy Land based on the Torah's laws. He was fascinated by Yovel, the Jubilee laws, which guaranteed that each Jewish family would own land that would not be permanently removed or sold, even due to poverty. Cannaeus identified Yovel as the Torah's successful predecessor to Rome's failed agrarian law, and he therefore insisted that providing the poor with economic opportunity secured by land ownership was a golden key to the survival and success of a civilization. This was a radical argument, turning centuries of political thought on its head. Cannaeus's conclusion was enthusiastically adopted by the great English Republican, James Harrington. In his 1656 vision of the perfect republic, Harrington incorporated fair distribution as a vehicle to enable economic independence for all citizens as a key component. Harrington's writings fluttered across the Atlantic, heavily influencing the founding fathers of the United States, and especially Thomas Jefferson, the third American president. Jefferson turned these Torah-inspired ideals into a campaign to establish a fair republic by preventing the rise of an aristocracy. He abolished land ownership laws that concentrated land in the hands of the wealthy few and strove to establish free public education for all children, regarding educational opportunity as critical to economic opportunity. The rest is history. Government action to empower the poor and improve economic opportunity for all citizens is now unanimously accepted as integral to free, democratic society. But the route this idea traveled remains remarkable, from the Torah's concept of Yovel to its ancient Jewish implementation in the land of Israel, from the Talmud's exposition to Maimonides' codification of social laws, and then a great leap across cultures to Petrus Cannaeus, the 17th century author of the Hebrew Republic, and further across the channel to English political theorist James Harrington, and further yet to American founding father Thomas Jefferson, and finally, from America to the wider world, social welfare and equal opportunity are remarkable gifts of the Jews.
Fascinating, right? Fascinating to see this, the incredible country that we live in and the values upon which it's based. We have come full circle. It's so inspiring that we stand here today in 2020, 5,780 years since the creation of the world. And we stand at a time where this incredible Torah revolution is really making waves in the culture and society we live. I mean, free public school, free education. You know, where I came from in South Africa, we went horse riding in Lesotho, if you ever heard of that country, landlocked in South Africa. When we went horse riding for a couple of days, the little black kids came running to us. And we thought they wanted money until we understood they were looking for pencils. Because without a pencil, you couldn't go to school. And without school, you couldn't go to an education. And without an education, you had no hope in life. To think that here every kid gets an education is an incredible value. Just by the virtue of being a citizen of this incredible country, we've really come full circle with the government providing so much for the poor. But this cannot ever substitute our personal responsibility. Remembering the mindset that's not your land, that's not your money. God trusts you with what He has leased to you. It's not just money, but all of their needs, especially their spiritual needs, making sure that they're not neglected and forgotten, that people are given all of their needs. It's our personal responsibility. We can't just outsource this to our governments, like Marty pointed out before, where that's got issues, right? We know people that could do a sit-in at City Hall. They could sit there maybe at the state capitol. They could sit there for a week straight lobbying for feeding the poor or caring for the less fortunate, but they drove past 15 beggars on the way and they didn't give them a penny, right? So, that's about outsourcing it to the government, right? We therefore have to think of practical methods in which we can buttress the communal responsibility, right? What the government, the city, the state is doing for the poor, which is wonderful. But to make sure that we're not losing touch of the values of tzedakah, of justice in our personal connection. And some ideas to do that are really important. Are, number one, remembering that the government does not replace your personal responsibility. Comes the value of Meiser. Ilan mentioned that, and some people think it's a Christian value. Tithing is a Jewish value. We mentioned it earlier in text, I think it was page number 9 or text number 9. The principle of tithing, where God says, I need to know that I can trust you with giving you more. I'm going to test you. I'm going to give you $100. I'm going to see what you're going to do with the 10. Right? If you have the guts to give that 10 to charity, okay, you pass this test. Let's see if you're a big boy. To pass the next test, now I'm going to give you $1,000. See if you can give away 100, and then 10,000, and so on and so forth. I remember when I got my first job, I was reading Torah. Right after my bar mitzvah in 2 different shuls, I was doing a lot of walking. I was making 400 South African rand a week. That was quite a lot, right? And I remember the joy that I had in giving 40 rand aside to tzedakah, because I knew this is my deal with Hashem. It's my deal, right? Every 40 rand that I give, right, I knew, ball's in your court now, you got to give me a better deal, right? And it was beautiful. I can tell you that never have I seen a person give charity, give a tithe, and lose from it. The word for tithing in Hebrew is ma'asel, same exact word as wealthy, which is ashir. Aser and ashir is exactly the same word. It's just an invisible dot on the shin to the right or to the left. It's invisible. Wealthy and tithe, God says, aser, tithe, bishvil shetitashel, so that you will become wealthy. You got to remember, He's testing us. So number one, you have to remember to tithe all income. The way I do it is, anytime I get a transfer into my accounts, immediately I automatically set up off the top a 10% removal, which goes into a separate account, which is my charitable disbursement account, that I call my partnership account with Hashem, right? That's my thing, 10%, and I use that to be able to give tzedakah. It's beautiful. So every time, I don't give tzedakah later. I know it's sitting in my charitable account immediately. As soon as the money comes in to my personal account, it goes straight 10%. So that's one way of doing tzedakah. Another way is making sure, like this, there's a beautiful text over here that tells you in text number 16, that what's better, to give a big lump sum or to give it over time? Many, many small contributions. There's a tremendous benefit to giving many smaller contributions over one annual gift, for example, because there's a tremendous... Here, look, take a look in the words of Maimonides, page 21. The single act of giving 1,000 gold coins to a worthy recipient does not cultivate in the benefactor the same spirit of generosity as does distributing 1,000 gold coins on 1,000 separate occasions. In the latter instance, the benefactor acts generously 1,000 times, thereby firmly implanting this trait in his or her personality. In the former instance, the individual is only inspired on one occasion, after which the inspiration dissipates. So there's a tremendous value to giving often. That's why we give every single day. You're supposed to give tzedakah. For the ladies lighting Shabbos candles, you should have a pushka, charity box next to your candles. And every day you're supposed to give into the pushka. But before Shabbos, before lighting candles, you're supposed to give double. One for Friday, one for Saturday. For Shabbos, when you're not supposed to give. And you're supposed to have a charity box in your house. In your house and in your business, by the way, very, very important, in your car. Very important to have a charity box in your car. Because what you're doing is that this is my partnership with Hashem, right? When you have the charity box, you're saying, I care about the less fortunate because I know this is not really mine. It's really Hashem's. You're inviting Hashem to your car, to your house, to your kitchen, to your office, everywhere. And that's why the Rebbe says you should actually have the charity box affixed to the wall of your house. It shouldn't be sitting on a table. It should be affixed to the wall. We have charity boxes here. I'd love to give you on the way out. They have a little hole on the side. So you're supposed to hang it on the wall. Because the wall of your kitchen, the actual physical walls of your office become walls that are associated with divine consciousness. With the awareness that I am on a mission, this is not my money, and it's very important to me not to drive a car without a charity box inside. I always immediately buy a car, a lease, whatever, rent, always take a little charity box with me, making sure, even if it's a glove compartment or something, that there is a place where the poor are remembered, the less fortunate are remembered, because I'm in partnership with Hashem. And therefore, by the way, it makes this car an emissary for a mitzvah. And emissaries for a mitzvah never get hurt. So it's very important that you don't get damaged on the way to a mitzvah. And also, there's another interesting concept that Rabbi spoke about, doing charity at official events. You'll notice many Chabad celebrations, there's charity box in the middle of the table with little coins, just so that everybody will give tzedakah. Just to inspire people to the idea of giving tzedakah. The Rebbe, you may have noticed, gave every Sunday dollars to thousands of people, promoting the idea of charity on every level, making sure that people remember that. And therefore I want to leave you with one thought on page 22, which is thinking of ways to apply what we learned today. Who do you know that may be in need of help, that maybe you haven't helped so far? Because maybe somebody that was part of your limitations of kindness. And what action can be taken over the following week to help that person, that individual, financially, emotionally, spiritually, or in some other form, to make sure that we can apply these principles that we've learned today. Again, it's not just gloating. We're not saying, we the Jews, we brought the social responsibility to the world. That's not what this is about. This is about making sure that we're keeping up the pace. That we're yearning, we realize that we haven't reached the finish line yet. We're still aspiring towards the ideal of social responsibility, which is what we've learned today. And I just want to finish this up with a summary video.
Lesson 1. No man an island. 1. Responsibility for others, as exemplified by our forefather Abraham, is a basic principle of the Torah that animates many mitzvot. 2. In Jewish law, charity is both an individual as well as a communal imperative. Jewish law maintains that A. the dignity of the poor must be preserved, B. people may be compelled to contribute, and C. the wealthier people are, the more they must contribute. The combination of these principles results in the traditional Jewish practice of providing for the poor through the payment of a tax to a communal charity fund. 3. The highest form of charity is to prevent someone from falling into need. The Jubilee laws that guaranteed land ownership for all Jews in the land of Israel served this purpose. 4. The Torah approach to charity functions on 2 levels: preventing poverty and caring for the poor. Within both of these levels, individual as well as communal efforts are required. 5. The underlying Torah theory of charity is that all of our material possessions ultimately belong to God. We hold them as a trust on God's behalf and must use them to benefit the needy in accordance with His instructions. 6. The ancient world, including the great Greek and Roman civilizations, did not adopt the Jewish value of caring for others and did not practice charity. The personal mandate to help the needy reached the world only after the Christians adopted it. 7. The now universal concept of structuring the economy to minimize poverty can be traced from the mitzvah of the Jubilee year to 17th century Hebraists, and all the way to Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers of the United States.
So this concludes our lesson tonight. Next week, we'll be touching on another entirely new topic, which is the idea of the impact of monotheism, which is another incredibly unique Jewish contribution to mankind, not only in the religious sense, but also in how it changed everything about how we think and how we view the world around us, how we view our problems and our struggles. That's going to be the theme of next week. If you haven't yet signed up, please let Ashley know if you'd like to sign up for the rest of the course so she can order a textbook for you to arrive in time for next week. Ashley's at the door, and if anybody wants to pick up a charity box at the door, just ask Ashley, she'll give them out to you. Thank you for joining me here tonight, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to come on over. I'd love to discuss with you.